I'm making a video I see on every Harry Potter film, and so far I've done one on the Half-Blood Prince and explained why it's a better movie than The Order of the Phoenix, and I did one on The Prisoner of Azkaban and explained why it's my favorite in the series. Now it's time to talk about The Order of the Phoenix, the fifth film in the series, and I'm going to break down why it's my least favorite. I was going to title this video why it's the worst, but I feel like it's a bit harsh because this is without a doubt based on my top 100 films that I watched the whole entire time. All the Harry Potter films are. They're near and dear to my heart, and I grew up watching them, but I also grew up reading the Harry Potter books. And this movie was adapted by the longest book in the series that it was based on, worse than any other films in the franchise. And I've gone over so many other YouTube videos and video essays, video reviews, and I got so many discussants saying that the book is their least favorite, but said that the film is actually their favorite. So I'm going to break down why it's my least favorite in the series, and I'll give examples from the actual book, which I basically gone over with just for this video. And I'm going to look at the behind the camera of the making of the film, and I'm going to break down what in my opinion went wrong. And I'm saying my opinion, because this is my solely based view of this film. I'm not going to say your opinion is wrong if you like this film. Before we start, I post videos every time on weekends a week, so make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to stay notified. Now let's get started. I had a lot of high hopes for this film, because many people said that the book is their least favorite and said that the film is their favorite. And people like me were coming off of what I consider Prisoner of Azkaban to be the best film in the series. And because of all this film had a new whole directing team, and David Yates became new to the Harry Potter series. And his editor, Mark Day, joined the team as well. And this was the only film that was never written by Steve Kloves. So instead, Steve Kloves was replaced by Michael Goldenberg for this film. With all the new directing team, I was excited to see how both David Yates and Michael Goldenberg would adapt such longest book in the series to a nice 2-hour movie, which in my opinion they did great. But unfortunately, I was very let down. And I'm not the only one. This movie's also hated by so many other Harry Potter fans. I mentioned the film being my least favorite in some other videos that I made, and so much so that I made a video on why I thought The Cursed Child was the worst book in the series. Many people voiced their opinions saying that The Order of the Phoenix is the worst. And while I agree it's not very good, I don't think it's worse than The Cursed Child, because there are actually a lot of good things that I really liked about The Order of the Phoenix film. This movie actually started out incredibly well. Looking at the book, it starts out with Harry listening to the news, eavesdropping on his aunt and uncle, then getting into a fight with his aunt and uncle, and then he goes off on his own. And while he's on his own, we see all of these strange things, like him having nightmares about Cedric, him being upset about Ron and Hermione not answering him, and we even see him dreaming about dark rooms and corridors, which is actually the Department of Mysteries. So what the film brilliantly did was show this conversation in a more changeable way, as it starts with Harry going onto the playground. And a nice little scene that follows is him watching a kid going to his mother, which is a nice touch upon of how he's feeling at the moment. As I said, the film did an awesome change of just letting Dudley mention about Cedric rather than letting Harry thought about his nightmares about Cedric. And we even see Harry pull out his wand right at Dudley where he makes a comment about his mother. And right where he pulls out his wand at Dudley, I was like, yes, this is the same exact Harry that I've always wanted to see. And speaking of him pulling his wand, he did the same thing in The Prisoner of Azkaban. But in this film, he put in his wand at Dudley and his aunt and uncle, rather than just Dudley. And when looking at both scenes, they both rhyme like poetry. And another thing that shows poetry that rhymes in both the third and the fifth film is when Harry either kicks or punches something in anger and frustration, but then gets easily calmed by the picture of his parents, which is a nice touch for the filmmakers that was never in the books. And the scene that follows of Harry saving himself and his cousin from the Dementors was something that I felt was both exciting and action-packed, but also frightening at the same time. With both of those scenes, the beginning of the movie was pretty much perfect. I was so pumped up and ready for Harry's character development and how fully it's gonna grow. But when it gets to the scene where he almost gets expelled, my excitement all of a sudden gets drained and it starts to get where my attention is headed. When he's told that he was not able to leave the house, they instead to let him be locked up for the Dursleys for the rest of his life, comparing how Harry was all alone during the whole summer. And instead of Harry being able to find out what's been going on, they instead of Harry be isolated from other people. and even addressed the facts of him not wanting to deal with his best friends.
All it does is make you care too much, and the more you care, the more you have to lose. So maybe it's just better
To what?
to go it alone.
I can fully understand what Harry is saying in this scene. Obviously, the filmmakers did great of him saying the line, "The more you care, the more you have to lose." It honestly makes you feel for Harry, and I think that was great writing that was not in the books. But then, once again, it just sort of got ruined when they had to put up a line of him saying to go it alone. I was like, why would you say this? You've been going through so many things that you've been suffering since after the incidents of Goblet of Fire. And there's no way that they would have such a back and forth situation like this. And it's just straight up weird. To make it worse, they have Harry take lonely walks that makes him isolated from other people, which is something is not easy to convey. And it contradicts everything they do later on in the movie with Harry being alone. But I will get to that in a minute, so bear with me. I think the major reasons why this film is not my favorite has to do with the director David Yates. As I said, this was the only film he directed. And I honestly think he's a great director and a great guy. But for me, I feel like he wasn't the right choice to direct this movie, especially with the way of making a new approach for this film, especially with the direction going on. With all that stuff out of the way, I was able to go over this film and realize that this was the shortest film thus far. And because The Order of the Phoenix is the longest book of the series, the film left out so many things from the book that I really enjoyed. And if you look at other books in the series, and films too, most notably The Chamber of Secrets, I realized that the second film was the longest out of the 8, while the second book is pretty much shorter, although The Sorcerer's Stone is pretty much the shortest book in the series. And I did not realize how much effort they put up with this when adapting books to movies. That being said, however, the film was able to make some very weird changes from the book. The one thing that they changed for this film is Umbridge, although I think her character in the film was pretty much more better in the book. Because in the book, her character was described as being as an old toad and pretty hideous looking. The filmed version of her character is quite the opposite, and I think Imelda Staunton is kind of pretty. But that being said, I honestly think she's more hateable than Voldemort, in my opinion. There were also some small changes that they had too, most notably the Room of Requirement scene. It had been a long time since I actually preferred the film version of this, but I've actually gone over the book and see how much I prefer the book's version of it. For the film version, for me, just having a room filled with glass was not much of a good idea. In the book, however, it was described as walls that were lined with wooden bookcases, and instead of chairs, there were large silk cushions on the floor. A set of shelves at the far end of the room carried a range of instruments such as sneakoscopes. Fortunately, the one thing that the actors had their least favorite scenes to shoot was actually the room requirement shooting scene. And in turn, they all had the actors dressed up in their uniforms. And what was weird is that they made the blue shoe covers for each of the actors to wear, just so that they would avoid getting any footprints on any of the metal floors or any of that stuff. And what's really shocking is that the Phelps actors for the Weasley twins and Ginny's actress, Bonnie Wright, feel uncomfortable with the way the room was being heated, which was extremely appalling. That being said though, David Yates decided to add some scenes that were a little pointless and make some questions pop up. Most notably the deleted scene where Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle starts to bully a school kid. I personally dislike this scene a lot. And even so, it was right where the room requirement scene was filming. We literally just see the kid getting bullied and just provide with no help. And if no one was ever gonna help, then Umbridge should have made a new decree whatsoever. And even Dumbledore would have put a stop to it, or McGonagall. But with Dumbledore gone, nothing would be the same. So adding this scene is just absolutely ridiculous. And what's even worse, or what's the most worst, is another deleted scene where Trelawney starts making a mess in the Great Hall. Both of these things are some of the main things that are just pointless, and is somehow not enjoyable. And even though this movie is considered to be an action, adventure, and a family movie, I realized that Michael Goldenberg decided to add some comedy, and it's not like it's a bad thing. However, I feel like there's this one scene that doesn't belong in a Harry Potter movie, and that is where Hermione gets picked up by Grawp. I mentioned this before, but I just want to get some details. I know this is not a scary scene, but you can feel the suspense building up inside you. But they somehow tend to add a comedy gold scene, which I feel like is not that necessary.
Drop it!
If you just look at this book, comedy is not the thing that comes to mind when diving into the story. This to me is pretty much our darker book thus far. There are many things that deal with the Wizarding World that is pretty much happening, like Harry dreaming about the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort's returning, and all the other stuff that's been going on. And this is why it's not a comedic book. This is a really dark book. And if you look at the Half-Blood Prince film, I realized that in my video essay, I just simply put on how the filmmaker is doing a great job with showing comedy in this film. It did mention why I named the title and why it's a better film. However, instead of focusing on all of that, David Yates explored this film much more different as he explored the characters that are in the world. He focused on the characters' psychologies, their journeys, emotions, and what's going on inside their hearts and their heads. Harry is the character that shows character development in that film. Harry being alone and being isolated is one of the main themes of the story. And it's not like Daniel Radcliffe had a terrible performance in that film. He does have a good performance. But to me, his character is really the one that I felt differently. Because in the book, they can just come out and say that Harry felt alone. But in the film, they have to show this. There are many examples of him being alone, like him walking alone on the playgrounds, which I mentioned before, him being locked up at the Dursleys, him stopping him by the common room, thinking there might be a distance between him and other people, him walking alone in the school grounds, and in the shot where Dumbledore ignores him, he's surrounded by people, and in the next shot, he's alone. And it even shows character development throughout the entirety of the film. He goes from a character that was isolating himself to a newly born and strong character. And I've always believed that it's by far the worst character development in this film. And on top of that, they added Harry screaming at Dumbledore when he would not look him in the eyes.
Look at me!
He did not yell at Dumbledore like this in the book. The only time he did yell at Dumbledore in the Order of the Phoenix book, however, is when he did go to Dumbledore's office and yells at him for every little thing he does and destroys everything in his office. My God, that would have been a great scene for Harry's character, but I can actually give David Yates a round of applause for cutting that scene. There was only one small moment, which is where Harry makes a move at Malfoy, where I was like, yes, that's character development for Harry that I like. Dumbledore is another character that I wanted to discuss. Obviously, him ignoring Harry just ticks me off at some point, but we all can understand that. The reason why is because he was so willing to protecting Harry, considering after the night where Voldemort tried to kill Harry. And even so, the conversation that he had with Harry in the ending of the Order of the Phoenix is pretty much the most important conversation thus far. And he's been so afraid to ask why, and he finally has the courage to tell him why. One of the things that disappointed me more than anything in this film was how much they cut Quidditch. Quidditch is my favorite parts of the Harry Potter series, and all the scenes that showed everything from beginning to end fascinates me more than anything else in the novels. And it might just be the reasons why I put the Order of the Phoenix book above the Order of the Phoenix film. In the book, we've seen so many Quidditch scenes that we've seen, and Quidditch played a huge role in the book. And there are so many other places in the world that were being focused, like I mentioned. But I'm going to count how many of the things that we see. The first one we see is the Mystery of Magic scene where Harry was able to go into his hearing. The second one was a Quidditch practice. The third was the Hogsmeade trip. The fourth was a Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin. And after Gryffindor beats Slytherin, we see Harry and George beat the crap out of Malfoy. The fifth was St. Mungo's Hospital. The sixth was when Harry and Cho go on their Valentine's date and Madame Puttyfoots. The seventh was a Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw match. And the eighth is the Battle of the Department of Mysteries scene. All the things that were being focused by the world, especially Quidditch being involved. But in the movie, they've only showed 3 out of the 8 scenes. And I literally remembered watching this on DVD and thinking how disappointed I was when they removed all that stuff. Those were the main focus on all these type of things that are being focused. Because as I said, the film was differently approached, and David Yates focused on the people that are in the world. So if only they cut down every single character development, cut down Harry's isolation a little bit, and cut down Umbridge's decrees, we would have had time for at least 1 or 2 Quidditch matches, or at least just one location, like St. Mungo's Hospital. So I went over the behind the scenes for this film, and instead of Quidditch being involved, they instead have a sport, which is cricket. If you don't know what cricket is, it's basically a sport that is like hockey, but it's more outdoors than indoors. I will say though, Matthew Lewis, who played as Neville, and Alfie Enoch, who played as Dean Thomas, did really great. But to me, cricket is not the best choice, and is by far really the most unworthy sport, and probably the worst. Now looking at the ones that they did keep, they were pretty well done. I think the Battle of the Department of Mystery scene in the film was pretty much perfect in the book version. The book's version of the finale is pretty long and very dragged out, because when we do get to the Department of Mysteries, I was pumped for a fight, and I was like, okay, let's get this battle started. But then, it drains the audience excitement, knowing very little about what's going on. In the movie, however, the sequence isn't too long, and it keeps the audience full of excitement. It's mysterious, it's thrilling, and it's heartbreaking. But here, it's very long. They find themselves in a circular room with a bunch of doors, and they had to guess which one, which is pretty much similar to how it was handled in the first book. But here, it's not how it works. In the first book, they each have a moment to come up with by standing by each other no matter what, and have their moment to shine. But here, they're just guessing. And let me tell you, guessing is not right to come up with. They first go to the circular room, then they go to the brain room, then they go back to the circular room, then to the death chamber, then back to the circular room, then to the time turner room, and then to the Hall of Prophecies. Sure, it was cool to see some other different areas of types of magic, but I think the book's finale could have handled way more better to the film's version, as it would start off with the Hall of Prophecies. Anyway, the whole battle in the film was pretty much more perfect, and in the climax, we see Voldemort takes over Harry's body, which makes the scene even more powerful. And Dumbledore even tells Harry that it doesn't matter how he's alike. And we also see his whole friends return to save him, and it improvises how much Harry cares for his friends, and deep down, he still shows his greatest strength, which is love. And Michael Goldenberg gave such a huge credit and did such a good job with, and I feel like it turns out to be one of my favorite things in the climax in the whole series. For me, this film was pretty much way more better than The Cursed Child, and the 5th book is way above the 5th film, because it does deliver big time. As I said, this film cut out all the things that they did good, but cut out all the right things that they should have been more important to the book, and kept all the right things. But that being said, however, I feel like I had to mention one of the deleted scenes that I feel like they should have kept. There are actually 2 deleted scenes that they should have kept, which is obviously after where Harry and Seamus got to their fight, and we see a scene where Neville actually stands up to Harry. It actually turns out that it shows how much Neville cares and respects for Harry. I so wish that they kept this, because it would mean so much more to the movie. And you can't forget the famous scene where Harry starts packing until he realizes that his friends try to help him cheer him up after Sirius dies. And it might just be one of the best important last scenes to see right before Harry goes into Dumbledore's office. I think it would be much more better to see in this, that would make the film much more longer, but kept all the other crappy changes. But I do have one small thing to say, which is where Harry enters Snape's worst memory, and that is the line where James said,
Who wants to see me take off Snivelly's trousers?
in the book, this line was, who wants to see me take off Snivelly's pants, not trousers. This might seem small, but I realized some of the changes that was quite difficult to go over. Using the word trousers, it makes it seem more like pants, but just comes off as more of either sweatpants or just jumpers. While using the word pants, it comes off as a regular jeans clothing. As for the scene where Harry discusses his event in the Hogshead, once again, I've already discussed his traumatic event in the Goblet of Fire. But for this scene, he talks to the whole Dumbledore's army gang instead of Ron and Hermione in the Gryffindor common room. And when I looked at the book, I realized that the movie messed it up and changed all these things to a different way. It just shows lazy writing for many people's audience that would flip their minds. Another thing that really bothered me was the way they changed rules of going into the ministry, especially of changing the rules for many Hogwarts students of not becoming prefects. This is another example of them making changes from the original novel that is just so stupid. The only time Ron and Hermione did become prefects is when they had to sit in a prefect's carriage in the Hogwarts Express, and help the students in the castle. As for entering the ministry, you have to dial the numbers 62442, which types in magic and is the easiest way. And the fact that they completely made these changes, once again, is such bad screenwriting, and it might just take some fans of the book off. Now, as much as I dislike this film, as I said, I still love it at the same time. Because they made bad changes from the book, they also made good changes. I think it's very suitable that the filmmakers had to write Dobby out of each films. They take his moments to Neville in the films, which I felt was really great. And speaking of Neville, I love Neville's character development in the film. I think Matthew Lewis perfectly nails this film pretty well. One of my favorite Neville moments is where he stands up to Bellatrix in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, where she taunts him. That was some great writing that was not in the books. And the scene that follows is where he also finds the prophecy sphere instead of Ron in the book, which might be a touch upon the readers, but because the original books never focused on all of that, I was really glad that they did touch upon this with Neville also becoming the prophecy. Luna Lovegood in the films was perfectly cast, as Ivana Lynch literally is Luna, and I think she's even more better in the films than in the books. Her moments in the films really stands out to me the most, and her making Harry feel better was a really nice touch, and honestly is great character development. I also love the fact of Luna showing Harry the Thestrals was even more great to see than Hagrid showing them in the books. I love how the designs for the Mystery of Magic and Azkaban were really set for this film, and Stuart Craig did awesomely well done with these design sets he made. Harry and Cho's relationship in the films was perfectly more better in the books. In the books, the relationship just comes off as pretty awkward, as Cho always cries back and forth. In the films though, they never showed Cho crying in any scenes, but although they did mention about her crying, I was glad that they never showed any of those. Before the ending of the movie, I was very disappointed that they never showed the line where Fred and George said to Peeves to give Umbridge heck. But I was very glad that they did show the big W in the sky that they mentioned in the films that was not in the book was nice. But the one thing that I always enjoy watching the most for this film is, of course, Sirius and Harry's relationship. I think Daniel Radcliffe and Gary Oldman did such an amazing performance and a job well done for these. And even their bond as their counterparts really grows strong, just as much how their relationship parallels to how it was performed in Prisoner of Azkaban. Overall, I was going to say why it's the most hated Harry Potter film, but I ironically 100% do not hate this film, but I gave my reasons why it's my least favorite in the series. It's a real disappointment that they had to make such changes from the book that was never even that accurate. However, I was glad that David Yates and Michael Goldenberg did well done of making the longest book in the series to a nice 2-hour movie. I plan to do more Harry Potter video essays for each of the 8 films, so be on the lookout for those.